take it further and talk a little bit about monetization and what's happening in that space. I'll get us started by asking a simple question. How can generative AI be leveraged to create new lines of business or significantly uplift the top line in the existing business? Satish, let's start with you.
Hello. Yeah. So let me just level set out here in the sense what we are talking about monetizing AI, right? So we are talking about not the efficiency play, but more adding new lines of business, which is new products and new services. That's what you're talking about, right? The top line.
Yes.
Right. So if you look at all the use cases that I come from financial services, right? I currently work for Charles Schwab, which is a financial services firm. Before that, I was in eBay, which is an e-commerce platform, right? So my observations are colored by these two industries, right? So what we have so far in Charles Schwab, for example, right? So it's mostly efficiency play, where we are leveraging internal documents, and you're using essentially AI as a summarizer, right? So to get new lines of business or new products, you have what I call it. You have to move from a temperature zero use cases to high temperature use cases, right? So temperature zero use cases. Let me give you an example, right? So the way Schwab is deployed AI right now is when a client calls in to a financial advisor or a wealth advisor, we have with a question, we use a RAG-based solution to kind of summarize answers and provide that information. So purely as a way of summarizing and providing information, right? So to develop new monetization approaches, you have to go to this go into the generative use cases, right? So more, can I find net new knowledge? That's a big thing, right? So net new knowledge in the sense, like, can a wealth advisor, there's an information overload, right? So and you're carrying on about 20 conversations with about 20 clients during the day, right? So can Gen AI synthesize information beyond the capability of that wealth advisor, which is available, right? So it's not humanly possible. So that's generating net new knowledge. And you can also go into the creative side where you are, for example, can I come up with a new wealth investment strategy, right? So that's where you're stepping beyond what you can summarize from internal documents and create net new knowledge, right? So that's why obviously you got to balance innovation and compliance. So you got to be, while you're being creative, or you're asking Gen AI to be creative, but at the same time you got to balance those two, right? So so those are the two approaches, right? One is to create net new knowledge, so moving from zero use cases, which is purely using LLMs as summarizers, to finding information that it's not readily available for a human being, right? So it's to synthesize information from vast quantities of information that's emerging and summarizing it and creating net new knowledge. So that's essentially what needs to happen to create new lines of businesses or new products and new services, and not just can I deliver what I'm already delivering a bit more efficiently, right? So this is stepping beyond that.
So creating net new knowledge, something that human cannot do, is key to generating new line of business, I guess, is what you said.
Yeah.
All right. What do you?
Sure. So, having seen this space for the last 18 months or so, there are three categories of use cases that can potentially lead to revenue generation. The first two dwell in the realms of efficiency, but there is an angle where you can use them for revenue generation as well. And we're currently, and I'll give you real-time examples of where we are currently engaged. So one, in the call center space, where you are actually touching the end customer. Any efficiency play where you are touching the end customer will also have a revenue generation play. For example, we are working with a very large asset management firm, around $1 trillion of asset under management, where the call center, we did a large contact center migration with AI, etc. But then now we are in the space of using call summarization, as Tish called out. But when you are doing those summarization, finding those new points of knowledge where you can have discussions, identify cross-sell opportunities with your end customer. The contact center agent probably, I would say, is still at a very low level from a food chain perspective, but still having those conversations with customers can generate or create avenues for new revenue. So that's one. Second, giving RAG pipelines or RAG-based assistance in the hands of your producers. When I say producers, I'll just give examples of both insurance as well as banking and financial services. When you're talking about insurance, if you are creating a system that is helping your brokers, helping your agents to produce faster, create more applications, create more codes, you will naturally see an uptake in your top line. Right now, if you look at the commercial segment, which is probably the most underserved segment in the insurance space, you're looking at a large commercial risk being catered to in 8 to 10 weeks. It takes that amount of time to get a code back, and then you start getting a policy written, etc. Right? You can fast track it to a high degree, which means that you're able to produce more. Your producers out there in the field will be talking to more customers. So you have a natural uplift in terms of the number of incoming businesses that comes in, right? So that's number two. And the third one I think we already spoke about is using knowledge to create newer products, which is obviously at a very different level where you are able to gather the information, customize your existing products. I come from banking and financial services where products in the last 30 to 40 years have more or less remained stagnant, consistent, with some variations. But Gen AI now provides you an avenue to kind of alter the landscape significantly, create customized products, create bespoke products. We were working with a large life insurer where they are trying to change the way they communicate with their end customer on a quarterly basis. I mean, anybody having whole life or term policies or any kind of annuity-based products will get your reports quarterly or on an annual basis where you get the report. Those reports will remain stagnant for 20 years. You'll see the same report every year at this moment, but you can now change the way you are delivering the message. You can create different content on the fly. You don't have to go through a large development cycle. So those are avenues where you can think of new products. So 3 levels: one at an engagement level, then handing assistance to your producers, and then finally thinking of new products.
Awesome. That was great. So basically you're saying that we should be thinking in terms of upselling, cross-selling, and increasing the productivity, and that would lead to more sales, hopefully more products,
Yes.
or more of everything, and that contribute to top line. All right. Thank you. Over to you.
My opinion in this one is we started on something called product description enhancements for an e-commerce client, and over the period of time we came to talk to a lot of product managers how to get into new products. So we understood the traditional way of doing things, like you get the focus groups, you talk to a lot of customers, you get all those data into it, and generative AI can help you brainstorm those new ideas and suggest you on based on your inputs, and it increases your go-to-market pretty quickly, and you can monetize them based on that. That is one way of doing it. At the same time, like I was, Buster, what he was saying is, you're good, like serving, instead of serving like in the contact center, where you will serve instead of 10 customers per day, where you are able to increase that to 100 customers, more leads that will monetize in the same way. So,
All right. I think there is pretty much agreement across along a few approaches. I think I'm gonna skip the next question because that was widely covered in the last panel. So I'm just gonna go to my third question, and that is, how do you see the evolution of large language models in open source versus closed loop system impacting the monetization strategy of enterprises? Varun, I can start with you.
that's a very good question. I don't know how many of have you seen the new Data AI Summit by Databricks CEO, where he quoted saying that the open source models are gaining a lot of traction in the recent years. They were top for the last 2 weeks, and Facebook released a new one. They were top. The biggest concern with open source earlier was cost, data governance, security. These are the biggest challenges that any industry is facing in that landscape. They're coming, if the company like Generative is coming up and saying that they're gonna keep the Unity catalog open source and they're gonna provide the governance and security for it, and you can own your data, I would say, the open source systems should be more converging towards it. And I mean, there's a lot of, with open source, the community comes toward it, and data science itself is more of an innovative field, so there's a lot of innovation can happen with the open source and the closed loop systems.
All right, thanks. Bhaskar.
Yeah, I mean, open source versus foundational models or APIs that comes from hyperscalers or any of the different providers right now. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of it coming out every week. I would say you have to take it at a use case level. It's not one or the other. So there are different considerations. I mean, if you are trying to use open source models, which we actually do a lot, I mean, you can go to Hugging Face, get model card, bring it in, do fine tuning, and then you go down the path of, creating fit for purpose LLMs. Depending on the size, you can vary from 7 to 20 billion, you can do various things, but at the same time, there's a cost of infrastructure. There is the GPUs that you have to come in, and in most cases, you will do cloud-based solutions. All these hyperscalers have reserved instances, you keep paying for it. So you need to be very careful in terms of what use case you choose. If you're going for inferencing at a high speed, be very careful in terms of how you want to use these open source models, and we've been doing it for the last 18 months or so, and burnt our fingers in a few cases. Then on the other side, you have the APIs, which comes at a very, you have to be very careful in terms of looking at the cost. Like for example, if you're going with Gemini Pro, which 1.0, there is 1.5, there is also Flash, and now they have open sourced it with Gemma a couple of weeks back. The prices are different, the input tokens prices are different, the outputs are different, it can vary significantly. I mean, 10x, Pro 1.5 is probably 10x of 1.0. The context window is very different. So it depends on the type of use cases. I would say that if you are able to narrow down the use case, you know what kind of questions you want to answer. If it's a RAG-based implementation, if you're doing inferencing for any kind of extraction of information, or you are doing structured data, the use case will be very different. So I don't want to go one or the other, because we have seen the answers falling on both sides. Just an hour back, I was doing an analysis for a use case that we are doing where open source versus can we use an API. The price came pretty much the same, right? Pretty much the same. It was not much of a difference. We were trying to use a open source model from Hugging Face and do all kinds of model fitment, but the price was coming to the same. So it will boil down to your use case and the speed at which you want to execute. APIs will give you the speed. You just have to do prompt engineering on top of it. It's fast. You can make changes over a week or so. On the other hand, open source models, you'll have to do weight changes. You have to go through that life cycle of fine tuning. So it takes time. So
Okay.
you have to choose based on the use case and the time that you have in hand.
Okay, so Bhaskar is basically saying you use the use case and then decide what way it can work out. And what it is basically saying, there's a lot of stuff coming up in the open source community that, like some Databricks, that's trying to up the game on the open source side. So there's a lot happening, I guess. Satish, what do you can add to that?
When you're using open source model has obviously contributed a lot to innovation, right? So because it makes it accessible to companies. But for a large company like Schwab or any large enterprise, right? Right now where we are using it is in a rack type setting, right? So you are not changing the fundamentals of that model, right? But when you bring it in and you fine tune it on your internal knowledge, then it becomes kind of closed loop, right? Because you fine tuned it, but now you're able to kind of get the feedback loop going. So there's a lot of advantages in bringing it in-house. So so it depends on the use case, but finally, a lot of use cases where you bring it in, fine tune, and that's where your value is.
Okay, I think there's pretty much consensus that there is no right answer. I think you can go either way. You just have to understand.
Also depends on type of contracts we have. If you're hyperscaler, the more discounts you get, just drive.
Yeah, that's key. That's key. And I can probably add to this. At Toyota also, we are trying to evaluate both options. We definitely have our contracts with the big players, the cloud providers, and then we are also experimenting with Llama, and especially with 3.1 and all, and a lot of the other open source LLMs. So yeah, I think it needs to be seen what happens in the next 18 months, I guess. All right.
Yeah, I mean, just one point to add here. Progressively, the cost of the APIs as well as the infrastructure is going down significantly. I mean, every quarter you're seeing it's dropping. So whenever you are creating a business case, I mean, in most cases, every board will ask for a business case, every committee will ask for a business case. Please do factor that in, that the cost that you are seeing now will be completely different 12 months down the road. So you need to factor.
Yeah, OpenAI slashed their price by 50%.
Yeah. I think it's happening across the board.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I think let's turn a little gears a little bit to understand in what ways can generative AI can be used to augment existing operations or add capacity, and how can this translate into competitive advantage? And you can talk some examples. And this time I can start with asking maybe.
Sure. So competitive, going to competitive advantage, obviously there are business-facing use cases that were not tried in the past. Now they are a reality. You can obviously give a competitive edge for sure. On the software development lifecycle, I think it has been established and proven that there's a huge benefit that's going to come. So that's a no-brainer in my case, that everybody should think of using co-pilots, using any internal assets that you want to use for software development, whether you are using for any kind of custom development, whether you have an external party coming and doing it. That's a no-brainer. In fact, one of the key blockers for modernization has been the amount of effort, amount of money that needs to go in terms of doing large-scale transformation. Those initiatives will get slashed by at least by 1/3, if not more than that, right? So I would say, those are no-brainers that will give you at the edge. You can modernize really fast and focus on software development side because that's proven. On the business side, obviously there's an element. The use cases are out there. You have to also focus on how do you make your end users use the new tech better. So there are a lot of newer use cases which you can evaluate. But to begin with, at this moment, start with knowledge worker productivity. You focus on those personas in your business value chain who does operational work. If we talk about banking space, like AML investigations, dispute resolution. There is tons of effort that's going in. In fact, you have large BPO centers in different centers doing all this data crunching. Those efforts will just get slashed by a factor of 10. So I would say that those are low-hanging fruits that you can focus on. And the faster you do, you will have that advantage. Your competition will catch up. Everybody is probably trying to do all of them. It's the question of who starts first. But the point to note here is that if you start now, you'll mature as well. You'll know how to use the tech better, then you can experiment on high-value use cases. So the faster you start, you might have a short competitive advantage, while the others also do the same type of initiatives, but then you'll mature faster.
Okay. So do quick, do it well, and keep doing it.
Yes.
Simple strategy. Or what do you add? If you have any examples.
For me, I would go with the business first approach rather than a technology first approach. There are a lot of business cases that you can go with and use AI, but whether AI is fully required or not is a point there. That's what it has to be. And again, I would agree with what Bhaskar said. Do well, start early. You might learn a lot along that way. We did a project back in the day, way before ChatGPT. We started with a language model. We failed miserably. We were not even able to achieve 75%. And then we learned, and then we switched to the entire model for that. and we achieved 90% accuracy for that. And it was then there's a lot of things that came along the way, and the businesses picked up what to use and what not to use. Like again, this conference is doing the same thing, how to gain the advantage other businesses as well, and in the market for the AI, in the AI space.
Okay, thanks, Varun. Satish?
Yeah, I think there is one area that I'm super excited about because I own a lot of the marketing propensity models in my company. These are any investment product, who's likely to buy it, right? So there is a really good play of traditional AI at the intersection of traditional AI and Gen AI, right? So any of these large companies, I'll give an example, right? So a large company like where I am from, or in that space, you're sitting on $8 to $10 trillion of assets, right? So even if it's a 1% attrition, right? You're talking about $100 billion flowing out. So traditional AI can identify who is that candidate likely right now. Then Gen AI can come in and complement that, create a custom offering to that customer who might be leaving, right? So there's a lot of play at the intersection of traditional AI and Gen AI. I think there's a lot of use cases. But one thing that hasn't been addressed in Gen AI, which traditional AI has addressed, is how to deal with errors. Like, for example, like if a model is predicting that 90% this customer is going to leave, right? Then probably it calls for a human touch. But if it's between 80 and say 60, then you probably do a custom email campaign, right? So it's kind of traditional. It's well understood. The business understands error in traditional AI, right? But Gen AI, the content it generates, how do you know that's good enough? What's the error, right? And what do you do with it based on the quality, right? That problem hasn't been solved. So there is an intersection. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of opportunity at the intersection of traditional AI and Gen AI, but there are a lot of challenges that hasn't been addressed.
Okay. So don't just do Gen AI, do all kind of AI, including your structured data, traditional machine learning, get the value.
Yeah, one can complement the other.
Yeah, one cannot complement each other. So I guess that's all the time we have for the panel. We'll take more questions from the audience.
Time for a question. Anybody have a question for this panel? Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Bhaskar, it's more specific to you. Sure. You were talking about the cost of all these investments going down. So while you are factoring the business case and the cost, are you guys also looking at the impact of carbon and the carbon footprint these models are making to the environment? Today we are talking a lot of ESG and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Can you quantify the impact of carbon footprint? Yes, I mean, you can in certain ways. Does it go to the business case right now, or is it going into the business case? It's not going into the business case at this moment, but I do believe that at some point of time, when you are doing wholesale implementation, like for example, for a large healthcare firm where we are doing a complete rehaul of their infrastructure, of their tech landscape using generative AI, where board is getting engaged, your ESG conversations will come into picture. That's number one. I think it's coming in. We are a privately backed firm. Our private equity is asking us questions.
Okay.
Absolutely asking us questions, right? When we go to them and tell them, hey, this is our growth path. Gen AI is going to take us to this level. The next question the investor asks, okay, what are you thinking about carbon footprint? Because their LPs are asking these questions, right? They give us the report, talk about our portfolio firms, and tell us what's the carbon footprint. So at an use case level, it's not coming in, but in broad brush conversations, it is coming in a qualitative way. But I do foresee that in the next few years, it will become an important parameter where people will start considering it.
I want to add a point to that as well. Recently, I was hearing to CNN this guy called Fareed Zakaria, where he mentioned the GPUs are almost equivalent to like close to 40,000 US households has been. America being the largest consumer of electricity, it's generating a lot of carbon footprint and all those things. It's AI is not sustainable, to be honest. It's not sustainable Maybe in the future, there's a lot of innovation has to happen there to get that to a lower point.